Alrighty, we're good to go, Chair Gorin.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm Susan Gorin, Chair of SCTA, RCPA, and thank you to the board for being with us this afternoon for our virtual meeting, and great work staff in preparing the agenda for today's meeting. So let's call the meeting to order, and could we have a roll call, please?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, members of the Board of Directors and members of the public. I'll be taking roll. We'll start with Director Madeline Agramonte. I don't see her on the list. Director Melanie Bagby.
Present.
Director Delinda Fisher.
Here.
Director Gerard Giudice.
Here.
Director Sarah Gurney.
Here.
Director Linda Hopkins.
Present.
Director Ariel Kelly.
Present.
Director Mark Landman. Which we know he's here. Director Sam Salmon.
Here as an alternate.
Director David Rabbit.
Here.
Vice Chair Chris Rogers.
Here.
And Chair Susan Gorin.
Here, thank you. The next item on our agenda is public comment on items not on the regular agenda. And Drew, do we have anyone present who would like to talk with us?
I see one member of the public who wishes to speak. Let me pull up that timer. All right, the member that we have in line is Steve Bertelbaugh. Steve, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you, Chair Gordon. Members, this is Steve Bertelbaugh with the Transportation and Land Use Coalition. And I just wanted to remind everyone that this is Public Transit Week, Public Transit Month of September. Good time to get acquainted with your local bus driver and to see how well the various systems connect. Take a ride on Smart if you can, and help us celebrate. Thank you all.
Thanks, Steve. Great reminder. Appreciate hearing from you.
Chair Gorin, I don't see any other members of the public wishing to speak on items not on the agenda.
Thanks, Drew. All right, we have a number of items on our consent calendar. Item number A, SCTA, RCPA concurrent items, the meeting notes from July 12th, 3.2, financial reporting for fiscal year 2021. I have a tickle in my throat, I'm sorry. RCPA items is the budget adjustment to the BayRen revenues and expenditure. And under SCTA, we have Measure M, design services during the construction amendment for the contract SCTA 10014. This hieroglyphic, Suzanne, with BFK for MSN. It sounds almost gang related, but okay, so thank you for that. And item 3.5, resolution number 2021-015, authorizing execution of application and agreement to modify the California State Social Security Agreement to provide Social Security coverage for employees of the Sonoma County Transportation Authority. So thank you so much, and for the preparation of those. Do we have any questions on those consent items? And I'm seeing no one raise their hands. Let's look on the participant. I see no one raising hands. Do we have any public comment on any of those consent calendar items?
I currently do not see any members of the public wishing to comment on the consent calendar.
Okay, thank you so much. Sam Salmon did put in the chat that he needs to leave by 3:50. Is there any other board member that needs to leave earlier than anticipated? And I'm not seeing anybody raise their hands. Ariel?
In case we do run long, I have a council meeting at 5 p.m. tonight, so I'll need to leave at 4:55.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ariel. Okay, let's move forward to the regular calendar, the RCPA.
We need a vote. We need a motion and a vote.
We need a
consent
vote.
calendar.
Thank you for that reminder. Really appreciate that.
So moved by Rona Park, and we also wish you a happy birthday.
Thank you, Gerard.
Second?
Is there a second? Who was that?
Ariel Kelly.
Thanks,
Director Kelly.
Ariel. Interrupted you. I'm so sorry. Okay, moved and seconded. Roll call vote, please. Drew.
On the motion from Director Giudice, Director Bagby.
Aye.
Director Fisher.
Aye.
Director Giudice.
Yes.
Director Gurney.
Aye.
Director Hopkins.
Yes.
Director Kelly.
Yes.
Director Landman.
Aye.
Director Rabbit.
Aye.
Director Salmon.
Aye, with an abstention to the minutes. I didn't get a chance to read them.
Okay, abstention. Vice Chair Rogers. And Chair Gorin.
Aye. Thank you, Drew, for the reminder and the vote. Now let's move to the regular calendar. Item number A, RCPA items. 4.1 mobilization of the electric vehicle strategy update. And this is an action item. So I believe, Suzanne, do you want to introduce this or just go right to Tanya Nareth?
We can go straight to Tanya. I see she's coming online right now. She's got a presentation for you.
Great, thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and directors. I am here this afternoon to give you an update on our EV strategy and recommended actions related to the EV Access for All partnership with the mobilization strategy. So I will provide a brief update in terms of the policy context and our shift plan, and then share with you updates on the status of EV adoption and charging station deployment in Sonoma County, and then talk about a couple of factors related to accelerating EV adoption, and then close with our recommended next steps, and we'll welcome your input on those. So the two questions before you today are, what is the status of the EV adoption and charging infrastructure in Sonoma County, and what are the recommended actions to implement our EV Access for All partnership strategy? So just a brief reminder of the Sonoma Climate Mobilization Strategy and our EV Access for All partnership, which is under the transportation section of the strategy. We have 5 objectives. The first 2 are related to increasing and accelerating the deployment of charging stations across Sonoma County. So we have a goal of developing or supporting the installation of over 10,000 public and workplace charging stations by 2027. Second objective addresses any remaining permitting barriers or obstacles to installing that charging equipment, and also limiting the permitting of new fossil fuel infrastructure. Then item number 3 is aimed at increasing the availability of more options for electric transportation. So looking at supporting e-bikes and other lightweight electric utility vehicles. Objective 4 focuses on the heavy duty EVs, such as public transit buses, which we know are already moving our transit providers to electrify their fleets, and then school buses and other large vehicles. And then lastly, to create an accessible and affordable EV assistance service to ensure that EVs are accessible to all residents of our community. And the focus of our EV adoption efforts really is around that EV assistance service. So next, I'd like to give a brief update on the Shift Low Carbon Transportation Action Plan, which I know you've heard a fair amount over the last year or so. But just very briefly, you may recall there's 2 main strategies in this plan. The first is the mode shift strategies, which is all about shifting from single occupant vehicles to alternative modes of transportation. And the second is the fuel shift portion of the plan. And that's really the focus for today's conversation. So the fuel shift plan outlined a goal of reducing petroleum use in transportation in half by 2030. And that was to be accomplished, or will be accomplished, by fleet efficiency gains. So under the current California regulations, such as the low carbon fuel standard, and then replacing our internal combustion or ICE vehicles with EVs. And the plan sets a target of 100,000 EVs in Sonoma County by 2030. And you can see in the graph on the right, a projection of what it will take to get to that 100,000 goal by 2030. And the red dots or line are the actual numbers today. So let me give you a brief update on the status of the plan. The RCPA was awarded a grant from the California Energy Commission in 2018 to implement the shift plan, or the fuel shift portion of the shift plan. And so we did accomplish a number of objectives under that grant. We launched an EV Ombudsman and Concierge service, which is the EV 101 service. I hope you've all had a chance to take a look at this knowledge base. It is something that we continue to update and to work with our partners in the county, especially Sonoma Clean Power, to make sure the information is relevant and current. We also worked with our local government partners to increase understanding and awareness of the shift plan and the EV actions in the plan. We did work around workplace EV awareness, outreach to about 40 local businesses to share information on EV charging stations and deployment. Learn from them that funding is a major obstacle or barrier to implementing charging stations, and so did some work to help share information on funding options, and we'll continue to do that. We also did work to update some EV charging station guidelines that were originally developed by the Sonoma County General Services Division. And that guide was developed in 2011 or published in 2011, and there have been a number of changes since then. So the RCPA team made some updates to that and shared that with our local jurisdictions. We also did work to support our local jurisdictions in implementing the streamlining requirements under AB 1236. And I'm pleased to share that although this slide shows that in the Permitting Olympics, which was a statewide competition to encourage jurisdictions to adopt the streamlining requirements, as of Earth Day 2021, we had almost all of our local jurisdictions completing those requirements. And so we were awarded the silver medal in the Olympics. And I'm pleased to share that now, if this competition were running now, we would actually receive a gold, because we do have 100% of our local jurisdictions having implemented the streamlining requirements. And then lastly, we made some refinements to the existing EV charging station siting analysis, which provides really good information to help those who are looking at installing EV charging stations, some information in terms of the best locations for those charging stations. So now in terms of EV adoption, this chart shows you the types of vehicles that we have registered on our roads in Sonoma County as of the end of 2020. And you can see a significant uptick in the number of EVs overall, and you can see the percentage of fully electric vehicles increasing over the last couple of years, which is really good news for us. And then in terms of charging stations, the graph on the left shows you the number of public and shared private charging stations that are in Sonoma County as of July 1st, 2021. Public stations are exactly what they sound, available to the members of the public, and shared private would be stations at places like workplaces that might be available to employees and visitors, but aren't available perhaps to the entire community. So we are making progress. As you may recall, our goal is to implement over 10,000 by 2027. So we're getting close to 1,000, but we definitely have many more stations to install here in Sonoma County. And then the map on the right is the heat map that was developed out of the SHIFT plan and the CEC grant. And the bright yellow portions of the map indicate the areas of highest opportunity for installing charging stations, meaning that these are the places where we expect the most EV drivers to be driving to and in need of charging. And then the blue areas are lower needs. So it helps us to prioritize where we want to install or see those chargers installed. And then in terms of funding, I mentioned earlier with the workplace charging that one of the barriers that's come up is a lack of funding or a need for funding to implement the charging stations. And there is a recent grant program that is being administered by Sonoma Clean Power and the Northern Sonoma County Air Pollution Control District, which is part of the California Electrical Vehicle Infrastructure Project, or Cal EVIP for short. And this funding became available in July of 2020. And it was very quickly basically oversubscribed. And so the key message in this chart is the red bar that you see here is indicating how many applications, the dollar amount of applications that was received in excess of the available funding. So it gives you a good sense of the demand and the interest in installing both DC fast chargers as well as level 2 chargers. And so you can see the green and the blue is the money that's available and that's been reserved. And then the red is the applications in excess of the available funding. There are other funding sources that have been available. So for example, PG&E has had funding programs for EV charging installation. The Bay Area Air Quality Management District, through its CHARGE program, has grants available for charging. Unfortunately, these programs also tend to get oversubscribed fairly quickly. The Air District program for 2021 has concluded. It had $6 million in funding for the Bay Area, and there was one regional project that was awarded funding for DC fast chargers and level 2 in the Bay Area, which included several locations in Sonoma County, in Kenwood, Rohnert Park, and the city of Sonoma. So next, kind of looking at what it's going to take to accelerate our EV adoption in Sonoma County. There's, I think, a fair amount of good news in terms of trends in the marketplace. And this slide here shows you the change in number of models of EVs available over time, starting in 2015. The blue bar is the blue box is the fully battery electric, and then green are the plug-in hybrids. So you can see how the number of models globally has increased pretty significantly. And then the range has also increased. So that's this blue dot here would be the range for a battery electric vehicle. And just to note, the scale here is in kilometers and miles. The actual range has increased from about 130 in 2015 to 210 miles in 2020. So all of these are they're good trends in terms of making EVs more appealing and for folks to adopt them. So then another piece of good news that I wanted to share in terms of cost of ownership. You'll sometimes hear folks say that EVs are too expensive. And while it's true that the price of purchasing a new EV has been higher than an ICE vehicle, Consumer Reports did a study recently that revealed that that difference is really coming down. And when you look at the full life cycle cost of an electric vehicle relative to an ICE vehicle, the EV really comes out on top, both in terms of savings in fuel. As you are probably aware, gas prices are continuing to go up. And this study actually looked at electricity prices across the country. So it's not just looking at one particular location, but really looking nationwide prices. There's also more and more comparability between EVs and their equivalents on the internal combustion engine side. And then a key point around lifetime ownership costs. Those of us who are fortunate enough to have EVs now, I, for example, have had an EV for about 3 years, and I think I've had my tires rotated twice and replaced my windshield wipers once. You just don't see the same kinds of repair costs that you would see or could see in an ICE vehicle. And so Consumer Report found that there's a very significant savings between an ICE vehicle and an EV. And as we see battery prices continue to drop, we'll see that initial purchase price difference between an ICE vehicle and an EV continue to narrow. So that's all good news in terms of EV adoption. So lastly, on accelerating, I wanted to touch briefly on the importance of equity and some of the equity considerations that we need to be thinking about plans for EV adoption in Sonoma County. So the RCPA has been, as part of our mobilization strategy, equity is really a key component. And so we were really pleased to be able to work with and partner with a research team from Stanford University called the DIVE team, which stands for Decommissioning ICE Vehicles. And their goal is to develop effective and, above all, equitable policies and incentives to decommission ICE vehicles and ensure true removal of emissions from this source. So really focusing on not only how do we put more EVs in people's being able to drive them, but how do we ensure that those ICE vehicles that are being replaced by EVs are truly coming off the road and not just trickling down to folks who can't afford an EV. And so as part of their work, the team did some research and conducted a series of interviews in Sonoma County this summer. They interviewed 39 people at Burbank housing, mostly Burbank housing sites, with a range of occupations, ages, and race ethnicity, and most reported incomes of less than $50,000. And so these are just some of the key initial findings from their research. They are continuing to do additional research and slice and dice the data that they collected. But overall, they reported or shared that the interviewees they spoke with recognized the value of electric vehicles to the environment, to their own health and safety in terms of air quality improvements, but they didn't see them as an option for themselves for a variety of reasons, such as cost, financing, misperceptions or misunderstandings about maintenance, and then a lack of access to charging, which I would say is one of the large barriers there. The folks I spoke with reported really experiencing a number of challenges in their lives that make it difficult for them to understand and take advantage of the programs that do exist to support, to lower the cost of EVs and help deploy them. So just as an example, there's a site called driveclean.ca.gov where you can go and put your zip code in and get a list of all of the available incentives for EVs. And I just put my zip code in there and it came up with 15 possible incentives, all with different requirements and application processes. And I was overwhelmed just looking at that. And so I can really understand how we need to make that whole process simpler for folks. And then another point that came out is that residents of these units were hesitant to move from the car they had, which was known and reliable. They knew how it worked. They had friends and family members who could do repairs on the cars. They didn't have to take them to a dealer, for example. And so they really viewed them as something that worked well in their lives. And so they didn't see an EV in the same light. I mentioned some misinformation and misperception. And so this is certainly an area that RCPA can do some more work on as we're looking at sharing additional information with the community. We can address some of those misperceptions and misunderstandings. And then the last item I wanted to mention is that the interviewees mentioned the importance or the challenges around financing, and that they often used less formal methods of getting the money needed to buy a used vehicle because they couldn't qualify, or the interest rates, if they went to a dealer, were exorbitantly high, like some cited 12 to 14% interest rates, which are just not affordable. So really important feedback that we're hearing from these interviews. And I guess the last thing I would say is that the team also found, just in talking to folks, that it really highlighted the importance of building up the used marketplace of EVs, that these folks are looking to purchase used vehicles and that there aren't as many used EVs out there as there need to be. So the research team is planning to interview students at the JC and SSU this fall, and we certainly hope to continue learning from and partnering with the DIVE team to incorporate their findings into the work that we're doing. So I'd like to wrap up now with our recommended next steps or actions related to the partnership. And I've broken these into the 5 objectives in our strategy and kind of tried to group them based on policy, coordination, deployment, and education and awareness. So with the first objective of increasing the number of charging stations, we'd like to do some policy work. So there was an EV Ready Community Resolution that was drafted as part of the SHIFT plan, and it could be something that jurisdictions would want to adopt in their own jurisdictions. It's something that I'd like to take a look at. It has a number of recommended actions, and so we need to revise those based on changes that have happened since this was drafted, but that's one policy action that could be taken. And then looking at existing policies around the installation of charging stations in new and existing properties, and ordinances that could be adopted to make those more stringent, so to go beyond the existing Cal Green requirements. And so there's opportunities for RCPA to do the research and policy development in these areas. In terms of coordination, we did hear some interest from our local jurisdictions in reconvening a group that was meeting fairly often a number of years ago to help coordinate and share information around municipal fleet conversion, these policy actions that I mentioned, and public EV charging. So we recommend reconvening that group. And then in terms of deployment, doing some follow-up with the businesses that we reached out to as part of the workplace outreach to understand, the status of their charging efforts, any new barriers, and also to continue sharing funding opportunities as we learn about them. And of course, continuing to research and identify those new funding opportunities. Then moving on to the second objective around local ordinances and the permitting of new fossil fuel infrastructure. The next item on your agenda today is to look at a draft resolution that would support a prohibition on new gas station land uses. And depending on the outcome of your discussion there and your decision, one of our next steps would then be to support our local jurisdictions in revising their land use codes. And then second, around coordination, working with our local jurisdictions to continue to look at, what are the barriers, what are the funding options for promoting more EV charging installation in Sonoma County, and identifying solutions. On the next objective, supporting the use of electric bicycles and other lightweight electric utility vehicles. We want to monitor state and federal legislation on e-bike incentives and promote programs, those programs in Sonoma County when they become available. And then also work with our partners in Sonoma Clean Power to support development of other options. And just a note on the e-bikes, the California Air Resources Board did receive $10 million in the state budget to implement an e-bike incentive program, and that program is expected to be established in July of 2022. So that's something that we'll definitely keep an eye on and share when it is available. And then last slide on the use of heavy duty EVs, this would really be a focus on funding. We know there's already activity going on with our local transit providers, for example, to electrify their fleets. And so continuing to look for funding opportunities there. And then lastly, the accessible and affordable EV assistance service, which I think is really where RCPA has an opportunity to devote a fair amount of our resources to in terms of working with our partners in Sonoma Clean Power to foster that EV adoption in low-income communities, taking the learnings from the DIVE group's research and also working with our community-based organizations to understand more about the barriers and opportunities, and then develop and fine-tune our outreach and communication materials to address any gaps in understanding and awareness. And then lastly, an idea that's come up in Healdsburg, some interest in doing some EV car sharing, to do an EV car sharing pilot at an affordable housing site. And so there are some models around electric mobility hubs that we'd like to take a closer look at and work with our partners to explore possible potential pilot sites and again, funding sources. So that concludes my update to you, and I look forward to your questions and your feedback on our recommended actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Boy, that was around the world in 80 days in about 10 minutes. Thank you so much for all of your work on this. Board members, do we have any questions for Director Narth? And I see a hand raised by Linda Hopkins, followed by Delinda Fisher.
Thank you so much, Chair Gorin. And I also wanted to say happy birthday, and hopefully we can sing silent on Zoom at some point, all for you, because I want to hear real life. But my question is regarding fleets, right? So the county obviously has a fleet of vehicles. We have really striven to be a leader in terms of, clean cars and EVs and, hybrids and things like that. I'm wondering if that's an effort that is being tracked across jurisdictions, and if there are any potential incentives in terms of government and institutional vehicles that we might leverage. I know we've talked about, there's electric buses and all those kinds of things, but there are also the ones, park ranger cars or just general use cars for government.
Yes, thank you. Great question. And that's really one of the ideas behind reconvening the EV partnership, is to be able to do that sharing and better understanding of what's happening across the jurisdictions. We've started reaching out to our local jurisdictions to understand the status of their fleet deployment, but don't yet have a full picture of that I could share with you today, but definitely see opportunities there for RCPA to help coordinate, as well as looking for funding sources to support.
Great. I feel like it would just be great to get those statistics of sort of the lay of the land, right? What's the percent composition of all the fleets, and then how can we come together potentially for, say, purchasing power? I think, and I believe that the county actually does provide vehicles for some other agencies or municipalities as well. So, is there an opportunity for partnership there? And then I just also wanted to say thank you so much for all of your work on this. And I'm so excited that we are having this conversation today. It was really kind of the highlight of my day to see that map of how many chargers we had 3 years ago. And we actually have made a difference, y'all, with Sonoma Clean Power and with trying to leverage funding. So I'm inspired and I'm excited to lean in on this again. So thank you so much, Tanya.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Director Hopkins. Director Fisher.
Well, I just want to echo those sentiments too, and looking at those graphs and seeing how the uptick is happening, and it's happening in a really positive manner. I have a question, Tanya, if there's been any research done as to what's going to happen with all these ICE vehicles as they become decommissioned? Any thoughts about that?
That's really one of the main drivers behind the DIVE team's work, is that they really formed up around a concern that, we're focusing a lot of our energy on deployment of EVs, but we're not talking a lot about how to get those ICE vehicles off the road. So I know they're doing work around that. I haven't heard of work done elsewhere, but it's definitely a topic that needs to be looked at, because what we're at risk of having happen is that those ICE vehicles, they're just going to trickle down and stay in our fleet for for a very long time unless we have programs that will equitably take them off the road and ensure that folks who need access to that mobility have access to an EV solution and can let go or get rid of that ICE vehicle.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Director Bagby.
Well, happy birthday, Madam Chair. And I'll follow this up. I was very interested in seeing the idea from Healdsburg about, the car sharing programs at possibly at, at affordable housing developments. And it's similar to a subject that has come up in Cloverdale before. We've been advised by the Urban Land Institute and PlaceWorks to, analyze some of our parking requirements, specifically in the downtown core, in order to attract, more dense development. And in some of those initial discussions, I asked the PlaceWorks group, if we were to attract a intentional living or affordable housing development, is there a way that we could incentivize a car sharing program? And I really think that that's the nexus. That's the kind of nexus that RCPA staff is uniquely equipped to develop on behalf of the smaller cities, because we just don't have, the staff bandwidth in-house to, find out if that is feasible and, if that's workable and how we would incorporate that into our policies. So I was wondering if that is something that has possibly come up in some of your, behind the scenes discussions, and what your thoughts would be on, pursuing that kind of policy, because it's really the intersection of, land use policy and transportation where, we can really make an impact.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, I would say it's come up primarily in the feedback from Healdsburg so far, but really we recognize it as an opportunity to support, and that it's an idea that may not work on a small scale, but if we could look at doing something, Sonoma County wide and identify a number of locations that might become more feasible. And so that's what led us to really put it on our list to evaluate.
Yeah, you can include downtown Cloverdale, and the discrete area of the downtown core. Yeah. And so I kind of see it as being a solution for, discrete smaller areas, but probably, possibly in all 9 cities and possibly in other areas. And so, yeah, that's something I would love to see us pursue. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I would also add to that, really wanting to learn from the car share that we did as part of the SHIFT plan, and take those lessons learned and incorporate those into anything that we do around EV car sharing. So.
Great questions. David Rabbit, followed by Ariel Kelly.
I appreciate very much, Tanya, the presentation. I know, I think it was probably more than a year ago when I talked to Karen Eggerman of the DIVE team from Stanford. Their initial pilot program was the elimination of the internal combustion engine in Sonoma County, and really using our county as a place to look at all aspects of what you do to retire those internal combustion engines, which I think is very, very important to achieve that goal. And I think as Director Fisher implied, and I know that there's work moving on in that. It's one thing, for someone to sell their existing car, trade it in or whatnot, and then buy an EV, but it doesn't take that car off the streets. And that's really the ultimate goal. So look forward to continue to work with them. Know they're continuing to move forward here in the county. And I thought the points that they made regarding the equity issues, especially on the financing side, were really spot on, and is something that I think that we can try to work with them on to make sure that we're as successful as possible. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ariel Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and happy birthday. Thank you, Tanya, for the presentation. And this issue is very important, and have been having some really interesting stakeholder meetings in Healdsburg with our low-income residents over the last couple of years to talk about this. Healdsburg did an electric bike rebate program in our city to see if more folks would adopt the usage of purchasing an electric bike and getting a rebate. And that program, I think, initiated about 2 years ago. ago. And then it's led to us adopting an e-bike share program, which this group so graciously approved and allowed us to go out for those, the Quick Strike grant on our e-bike sharing program that we're hoping to implement in short order. So we've been having these conversations for a while. And a couple things I wanted to just throw out there with the Cal Green Building Code requiring residential housing developers to put in infrastructure for EV charging, it seems as though there is a missing final step of actually installing the chargers. So a lot of our housing has plumbed the infrastructure, but they have not actually adopted the charger. And then a couple of residents that we spoke with said, you know, my biggest concern if I were to switch to adopting an EV would be that we have designated parking. Every tenant has their own individual parking spot. And if we only had 1 or 2 chargers for the 50 units in our building, how would I be certain that I could actually have access to the charger? And so one of the things that residents talked about was creating just a charging schedule where folks would say on Monday, it's Mrs. Smith's day, on Tuesday, it's Mr. Lopez's day, on Wednesday, you know, so everyone knew with certainty that they'd be able to charge their car at least once a week. And given the mileage and the increase in EV battery storage, you know, charging once a week, unless you're a super commuter, would probably be fine. So that explaining the battery capacity, and when we were having these community conversations, people were really happy to kind of understand more about how that charging infrastructure could work. And then kind of the same thing is happening with EV bikes. So if people don't have a secure place to store a bike, e-bikes tend to be heavier, they tend to be more valuable. And if there isn't a secure place where they can charge it and store it locked, people are less likely to purchase one because of they don't want to climb up 3 flights of stairs carrying this heavy bike, and they don't have anywhere to charge it. And so obviously there's e-bikes that have, you know, swappable batteries that you can charge in your home and whatever, but some of those misconceptions were also out there. And so in terms of building code, having secure bike storage that also had plugs was another thing that came up where folks were saying, if I don't have anywhere to store it, if my building doesn't have bike storage, I would never buy one. And so I think those were kind of and then workplace charging. So a lot of folks said that besides in their apartment building, they spend at least 12 hours a day, if not more, at their place of work. And if there was a place for employees to charge, that they would use it. So then we talked to employers and they said, we do have EV charging, but it's just for our customers. And so having those dialogues with, you know, whether it's a winery or a hotel or some place where folks are working, especially low wage workers, having access to utilizing that charging infrastructure that's not just customer parking or customer charging would be critical for people to feel security in adopting an EV. If they had places where they know they could charge.
Great. Those are great inputs. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
And I really like the all-inclusive list that you just read off. It would be great if you sent all of those comments to Tanya. She may be faster than I am in writing down all of your comments, but she may appreciate the list that you just read off. So thanks so much. Let me see, Mark Landman, followed by Sarah Gurney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, a suggestion I wanted to make, something that wound up happening in my community, and as an elected, you know, we love to take credit for things, and I can't in this one because our staff totally came up with this and blindsided me in a wonderfully good way. But they did some research. It was time for, in replacing our rolling stock for our police vehicles, they came out after, just as staff said here, their research showed that the cost of operating the EV was better, much better long-term than the IC, the internal combustion engine vehicle. So we've gone with that for now and future police department vehicles. They're all going to be EVs here. I'm sure the police were thrilled when they test drive the Tesla and Ford it for the first time. I bet they enjoyed that. But I think this is a nice place because it wasn't just obviously the GHG reductions was something that weighed heavily in staff, but also bottom line, it just worked in a dollars and cents way too. And this is a great place to start because there's high visibility for it, which helps get the message across. And that is something that tends to replace somewhat often, probably compared to many of our working vehicles. Police vehicles get worked hard. I'm sure our EVs will last longer than our ICE vehicles, but still. And secondly, the question of what happens with these ICE engines that are replaced, where do they go? I seem to remember a buyback program for cars that failed smog, maybe roughly a decade ago. It seemed very successful. Actually, when I ran into it, I had an older pickup truck, a small little pickup truck that had ran for years. It had numerous issues, but it was still running like a top, and I couldn't make myself get rid of it until it failed to pass smog. And when it was suggested, oh, you can turn this in here and you'll actually be paid to make sure this is off the road. And I talked to other people about it. It was incredibly well received, worked well. I believe it was a state program, if memory serves. There's a template right there that perhaps could be revived. And it's kind of the same thing. These are all vehicles that are still functional, but bottom line, they're all a little past their use-by date, and they have issues with the environment, and long-term, cost-wise and environmental-wise, it makes sense to get them off the road. So just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And Sarah Gurney.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and happy birthday to you. And thank you, Tanya, for your fast-paced and very thorough report. Thank you to the directors for this conversation. I'm really interested to hear what the other cities are contemplating, and as well from our supervisor, that regional view. I want to make sure that, Tanya, you're considering some barriers to installation that I'm familiar with in Sebastopol and may resonate with some of the smaller cities or smaller areas in some of the bigger cities. First, 50% of our housing, perhaps more, residential housing is occupied by tenants, not owners occupied. So when the owner receives a subsidy, we have an equity issue. Landlords are very hesitant to invest in these charging stations. And if they do, they pass the cost on to their tenants. So we have an affordability issue there. Also, in our old neighborhoods, as I say often, Sebastopol is an old town and is subject to a lot of remodel. In our old neighborhoods, we have a lot of homes with a one-car garage, which is very likely not used for the car. We also have a number of homes with shared driveways, which means there's an access issue and some conflict there. We also have a number of old homes with no driveway, which means we have people parking on the street. For all those three situations, I think we pose this challenge to installation, and that is, how do you get the equipment across the sidewalk and down the curb to a parking place on the street? I know a number of people really interested in that. We have that issue at our transit hub for our electric bus because it can't survive all day on one charge looping around Sebastopol. So I think that across the curb installation is really, really important. I wanted to make sure you've thought of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm not seeing Linda Hopkins. Did you raise your hand again?
I did. Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to actually add on to something that Director Landman said, which was, you know, the Cash for Clunkers type program. And I was thinking about the fact that a number of us serve also on air district boards on this board, and that currently air district boards are replacing clunkers with tomorrow's clunkers. So there's these programs to eliminate sort of some of the dirty diesel engines in agriculture. And what are we doing? Right now we're replacing them with better diesel engines, when actually increasingly there are electric engines and electric tractors that are available. So just one thought when it comes to policy, if there's some role for this board to play in advocacy, wouldn't it be great if we're spending hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars of taxpayer money to buy new diesel engines? That makes no sense, right? Wouldn't it be great if instead we encourage the purchase and acquisition of electric tractors and electric motors for pumps and things like that? So I just wanted to plant that seed, and I know that at least a couple more air district directors are on the board as well.
Thanks, Linda, and that's a good segue to me. First of all, Ariel Kelly, thank you so much for using this as a car sharing program and affordable housing project. The Electric Vehicle Association came to me a number of years ago and suggested that as an equity issue, looking at a car sharing program and affordable housing projects that would actually cut through some of the comments that a number of you made about how we schedule charging for the tenants and where they would charge. So I think it would be really helpful if RCPA could help cities and affordable housing developers finance and actually put into action car sharing and charging programs in the complexes and developments, especially as they are being approved for construction. Many of you know that, okay, rebuild the house, and the fleet of service vehicles coming up to any rebuild, any construction site, panel trucks, ladder trucks, dumpster pickups. It's amazing to me. And I guess my question, Tanya, is where in the strategy, maybe I missed it, are we really talking about not only city fleet vehicles, but working in the construction industry to figure out how we replace those pickup trucks and the service vehicles that are so essential for delivering goods and workers to the job site?
Yeah, so we do have an objective focused on heavy duty EVs. And so I would see those falling into that category. And I think our role there, at least from what I can see now, is really around identifying, as Director Hopkins noted, there are more and more replacement type, for tractors and other types of equipment. And so making that more visible and, education around that, as well as looking for funding and identifying funding programs that would support the transition from the diesel powered or, gas powered vehicles to the electric. So definitely is part of that.
And I know that a number of the areas around the county, we have a lot of visitors coming in, and I'm seeing more and more Teslas on the road, folks coming in from the Bay Area and elsewhere. Obviously, they're figuring out how to charge their vehicles wherever they're coming from and going to. Have we, and I haven't seen a priority list, especially in Sonoma Valley, that would really capture the need for charging for many of the electric vehicles, visitors coming from outside the area. Have we captured the need for prioritization of charging stations in those areas?
Yeah, so we did develop a list of top 20 sites or areas. And so I can share that with you, and we can look at what was identified for the Sonoma Valley, as well as that heat map that we have could also help pinpoint those priority locations. So I think between those two.
I saw a lot of orange, but
yeah, it's too, I know it's too high level in the slide, but we definitely can drill it and share more details with you for those areas that you're interested in.
And I guess my final question is, I'm seeing a lot of communities like Oakmont buying into Teslas. I'm assuming that they're charging their vehicles in their garages, and so they're getting the charging station somehow. Does our data capture how many private individuals or companies actually have purchased and implemented electric vehicles?
We don't have data on private charging stations, although Sonoma Clean Power might be able to provide information because they do give away free chargers. So we could probably get some indication from Sonoma Clean Power. And then, the CEC data around the number of EVs, you can actually, if you go to the website that I included a link to in the staff report and the PowerPoint slide, you can see the breakdown of the types of vehicles that are being purchased. So the number of Teslas, Model 3, Model S, Bolts, et cetera. So you can see that data, and you can also drill down to a zip code level on that chart. So you can look countywide as well as zip code level.
Every time we have a presentation by Skype in front of the Board of Supervisors, I say that's great. You're capturing data of those folks who are financing that equipment through the Skype program, but many are financing that through their own financing and pocketbook. So we're not really capturing the data of how widespread electric vehicle usage is or solar panel installation. And it would be great if you could try to figure out how widespread, where our goal is and where are we in getting to our goal, whether it's electric vehicle, heavy duty fleet or passenger vehicles.
Yes, and we may be able to get at some of that information through permitting, the permitting systems in each of the jurisdictions, because these installations do require permits. And so that could be another way to get a different slice of the data.
Great, thank you. I think that's all the board questions that I have. And do we have any public comments or questions? And then we'll bring it back to the board.
Yes, we do have one member of the public who wishes to speak. Let me get that ready. Oh, we have several now. So we will start with Eris Weaver. Eris, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
I'm gonna have to talk really fast because I don't know if I can do this in 2 minutes. I would really like to see e-bikes get more than just a crumb in this whole program, because I think just switching car, from one kind of car to another kind of car isn't going to get at all of our problems. Building all those new cars means all the stuff they're built out of has to get dug out of the ground somewhere and has to get built in a factory somewhere, and then all the other cars we take off the road are getting scrapped somewhere, and there are environmental costs and emissions at all of those places. I would like to see those slides where you're counting how much use of electric cars in the county has changed, and why are there not any data in there on electric vehicles. I did a quick calculation today that the purchase price of one low-end electric car would buy you 15 to 30 e-bikes, good e-bikes. And I have no idea what the lifetime ownership cost of an e-bike is, because I haven't calculated that with my own, but it'd still be way lower than an electric car. To Director Hopkins' comment about replacing some EVs in fleets, I was approached by a staff member from the city of Petaluma talking about adding some electric bikes to their fleet. And most of the cities are small enough that if it's not a public safety vehicle or a maintenance vehicle, could use e-bikes for some of your stuff. Okay, where was the other one I was going to go? To Director Kelly, every bike needs a place to park, not just the electric bikes. I'm hoping more people on bikes means more advocates pushing for better bike parking and other infrastructure. And then again to Director Landman, I also did one of those trade in the car things, and I have no idea where my old smoggy car went. Did they send it to another state or another country with less stringent requirements? Did it get scrapped and again use resources to get smashed up, and where did it go after that? I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Eris. The next individual I have in line is a Woody Hastings. Woody, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Great, thanks very much. And thank you for the opportunity to speak. Good afternoon, all. My name is Woody Hastings. For this item, with my Climate Center hat on, first, I want to just really concur with what Eris just said about doing what we can. And I know that the board does look at all of these issues. Not just switching out gas cars for EVs, we really need to broaden transit and active mobility, micro mobility, all those things. The drum I want to beat on this that I have been talking about for many years, and I'm not the only one, but it's that I know what I think something that's very important for this as we fund and deploy EV charging stations is getting adequate signage for those stations so that, so the EV drivers can find those stations. But for me, even more importantly, it's to get folks that are not aware of electric vehicles seeing the fact that there are EV charging stations around and about in their community. They're invisible in any town. And I know that like the Cali VIP program, if I'm remembering correctly, does not include funding or much funding, adequate funding for signage other than those tiny little blue EV charging signs that you only see them when you're pretty much there. You've already found it, and there's the EV charging sign, right? Now, of course, we don't want gaudy, big, gas station style signs, and funding for that's probably never going to come. But some kind of sign, maybe a uniform type sign that just alerts EV drivers, but really more importantly, non-EV drivers, that EV charging stations are all around town. You can see them, there they are. And I know Sonoma Clean Power is looking at this, working on it. You probably think about it, but as you go to deploy, especially obviously the public charging stations, adequate signage. Thanks.
Thank you, Woody. Let's see. The next person I have in line is Michael Lepale. Please forgive me, I've said your name wrong in the past. Not that. There you go. I've permitted you to speak, Michael. My apologies on that. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, thanks a lot. Yeah, well, thanks everybody for talking about this really important issue regarding transportation and the effects on our climate. I just want to reiterate what both Woody and Eris said, and that is, I view EV vehicles as a transition form of transport. We really need to invest in active transportation and other forms of mass transit. And it's enough if we do have EV or electric bikes to share, but if we don't have safe infrastructure, we're not going to get people riding e-bikes to scale that we need to really make a difference. So we really need to look at separated bike paths like you see throughout Europe. Many other cities in the United States are doing that, and the ridership just goes up tremendously. And therefore, individuals can use their e-bikes for utility riding and not just recreational riding. And another piece is, it's more a question, the EV chargers, it would be a simple matter to put in 110 connections so you could charge your EV bicycle. That would be simple. Another question is, what's the difference in costs in level 3 and level 2? If we invest in level 3, charging at complexes, you could charge more cars over a shorter period of time and make it available to more people. So, and lastly, I think there's a good niche to find to convert existing ICE vehicles to electric vehicles via conversion kits. And that would fill a void at car dealerships that if we're all electric will reduce their repair. They could be installing these conversion kits. I'm out of time, so I'll end it there. Thanks a lot.
All right, thank you, Michael. The next person I have in line is Karen Eggerman. Karen, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to listen in on your meeting this afternoon. First, I would like to thank, I should remind you that I am on the Stanford Dive team doing the research that Tanya spoke about. I really appreciate her presenting the material, and also for her and her team for listening to us and being willing to work with us. I thank you, Supervisor Rabbit, for your support of our work as well. And I just wanted to say that we may be a little bit ahead of the curve in looking at decommissioning ICE vehicles. It is finally becoming a topic at other meetings, for instance, at CARB. However, we're in a position right now, I think, as a society where the convergence of enough charging stations, enough types of vehicles with the range that's necessary, and the financing haven't quite coalesced to a point where we can actually make this happen right away. However, we're working towards that goal, and hopefully we'll have some good information that we can share with all of you again in the fall. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Karen. The next person I have in line is Shirley Johnson. Shirley, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. This is my first time at your RPCA meeting, and I'm enjoying it. Thank you very much. Yes, I drove my ICE into the ground. I think it had 230,000 miles, and got the cash for a junker. That really helped me put my down payment on my i3 that I've been leasing. This is my second i3. So I've been leasing an electric car for 4 years now. So my input is, since I'm in a wheelchair, what I have seen that's kind of a problem with getting a hold of the charger is sometimes you have like the bumpers, you know, where you can't run your car into the charger thing. And so it makes it, sometimes I can't even get to the charger. Luckily, it's not too close to the where you take off your charger. I'm probably not making sense, but just a heads up when thinking about folks in wheelchairs. I'm the only one that I know that drives an electric car that's in a wheelchair so far, but that's my input as far as putting in more charging stations. And actually right now I'm charging my car across the street at the Target charging station. Thank you, Roner Park. I mean, it's very, very convenient. I live in an apartment, and it's, you know, I just roll over there and charge my car for 3 to 4 hours, and it's very affordable. So thank you, Roner Park.
Thank you, Shirley. Briefly, if there, I believe it's Andres. If you had your hand up, can you please put your hand up again? I may have accidentally lowered it. But in the meantime, let's go to a Jean Z. Jean, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
I think you were referring to me.
I believe so.
Yeah, it's Jean Zingarelli, and I'm on with the League of Women Voters, but I am not speaking for them personally right now. I just thinking, I wrote back in decades ago when I was in the 1950s, I wrote a paper about people's use of automobiles in the United States and how much it was part of their personal freedom to be able to move from here to there and whatever. And then I got to thinking, isn't there a way of working on converting gas stations to charging stations, because then the people would easily know where to go charge their cars. And we're not going to get around it. People are going to have to pay something for all that electricity that they get to charge their cars. And I don't know if there's ever been any thoughts about what to do about charging stations being where the gas stations are. So that's it.
All right, thank you, Jean. Okay, the next one I have in line is Kevin Conway. Kevin, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you very much, Drew. So I'm going to make some general comments about charging stations. I've been driving a Bolt for 4 years, and I have no problem whatsoever using my Bolt locally. I do have a charging level 2 in my garage, and so I just love it. However, we decided to take a trip up to Seattle, and we wanted to use our Bolt, which we've had for 4 years. And what we found there was discouraging because we could not find the level 3 chargers as we went. Tesla does a great job with level 3 chargers, and they have a great job with signage, as Woody alerted to. But when it came to the other level 2 chargers, they were pretty abundant, but who can take 6 hours to charge their car when you're on your way up to Seattle? So my general comment is these charging stations have to be set up in rest stops along these major highways, so that as you drive along, you know that if there's a rest stop coming up, that there's going to be a fast charger, a DC charging station there. I have all of the, the Blink and the EV Go and the Charge Point, PlugShare, Electrify America, Charge Hub, all of those I belong to. But even with that, we had trouble finding the fast DC charger where you can get up to 90% charge in about 30 or 40 minutes. That's really what's needed if people are going to make this transition from driving an ICE vehicle to an electric car. They need to know that on a long trip, they're not going to be waiting 6 hours somewhere on their route to get their battery charged. So thank you for allowing me to make those comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. The next person I have in line is a Terry Harrison. Terry, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Yes, this is Terry Harrison, and I've heard a lot of good things here this afternoon, and I want to congratulate you on the programs that you have going. It's pretty clear now that the climate emergency that we're into, that we're worldwide, we're not doing enough fast enough. An area that I would suggest that Sonoma County could really help would be not encourage tourism. I know this is a very unfavorable idea because of the bed, but cutting down the VMTs, we certainly should stop with our advertising program. That would cut down VMTs a lot. That's part of our something. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. The next I have in line is a Jenny Blaker. Jenny, I have permitted you to speak. There we go. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you. This is Jenny Blaker, co-coordinator of the Coalition of Opposing New Gas Stations. And I just wanted to reiterate some of the comments made by Eris Weaver about e-bikes and Woody Hastings about signage for electric vehicle charging places. I totally agree with that. And also with the comments from Mike Lepelt. But I also wanted to address the question someone brought up about replacing existing gas stations with EV charging. I think those two things are totally different from one another, and that the places where EV charging needs to be are at places where people already spend time, such as you've already been talking about, apartment complexes, homes, places where people work, where people live and sleep, and where people already spend time, such as health centers, cinemas, or that kind of thing, because nobody wants to go and sit in a gas station charging their car with electric charging for a couple of hours, but they could well charge their car when they're already shopping or going to a restaurant or something like that. So I would say EV chargers need to be where people already spend time, and gas stations, as they eventually become decommissioned, need to be replaced with other uses. That was my main comment, but I agree with nearly all the other comments that were made already, and thank you for all the work you're doing on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. We have one more in line. Let's see, Jack Schwerigen, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you, folks. Jack Schwerigen. I'm an engineer by training and experience, and I worked a lot on hydrogen, and I would like to put in a plug for the hydrogen fuel cell vehicle because they can refill as fast as gasoline engines can. There's no waiting for charging. So just as fast with hydrogen as you can with gasoline or diesel. That's particularly why the long-haul truckers are really leaning towards hydrogen, and why the state of California is boosting hydrogen so much, because the truckers can't afford to park for hours waiting for their trucks to recharge. I don't know, that doesn't carry one-to-one to private vehicles, but it's certainly something to consider. And hydrogen is a reasonable alternative that should be considered along with electric all battery vehicles. It's trailing a little bit in terms of the technology development, but it's not far behind. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jack. Chair Gorn, I do not see any other members of the public who wish to speak at this moment. All hands are down. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you to the board members and all of the members of the public for commenting on this. Obviously, this is a topic that has captured the public's attention and passion, and we should move on. Tanya, this is an action item. What are you looking for more specifically? How could we be helpful to you?
So I'm basically looking for any inputs that you have on the recommended actions. And I did hear a number of great inputs and comments in your earlier discussion. So I would just ask if there's anything else that comes to the director's minds in terms of, looking at that list. Are there areas that you would like to see us prioritize? Are we missing any key actions that you think we should be considering? So if there's anything else that directors would like to add, that would be very helpful.
Great, thank you. Delinda Fisher, you have your hand raised.
Thank you very much. And I haven't said happy birthday yet, so I'll do that now. I agree that electric bicycles, I think, are something that many people in Petaluma have adopted. I don't know that they're replacing vehicles, and I'm wondering if there's any way we could be tracking that sort of information. Because I have a feeling they might be replacing vehicles, for instance, for a 2-vehicle home where they only really need one, and that electric bike would then serve the purpose for the rest of those trips, because as we know, 60% of our trips are under 5 miles. So, and I know that if we're not tracking these things, we don't have the information, right? We don't know if we're meeting our goal in some other way. So I would just offer that.
Thanks, Delinda. It's probably a good suggestion. We know that I see more electric bikes on the road all the time, and I have a feeling that they sort of replace the cars, especially if it's short trips. But I appreciate the suggestion from you and Eris and other folks, and the comments made by Ariel Kelly on the challenges with e-bikes. Absolutely, they are heavier. So any other comments from the board? And I'm up to a couple more. Eddie, welcome to SCTA meeting. Congratulations on being elected to the council. I don't think I've seen you since your election. so glad you are here.
Thank you, thank you. Well, I'm here to sing happy birthday, so we'll see how that works out, right? But nonetheless, happy birthday. Interim for Santa Rosa. My question is, what efforts are being, and Tanya, appreciate the efforts for decades that I've witnessed your efforts into really educating the public and the work that you do. And with that in mind, what are we doing to educate and bring forth the Latinx community? And apart from that question, I just want to make the comment when it comes to all the development that we're seeing in District 1 specifically, and to echo the statements of how we can motivate the developers as well as the community for the ride sharing and the implementation of electric vehicles, which I really want to echo that as again, with the amount of development that I'm seeing, I really want to see that coming forth. And thank you all once again.
So I'll just speak very briefly to the question about outreach to the Latinx community. That's really what we're starting with the DIVE team and the partnership there, and really wanting to build on the work that they've done and also start reaching out to our community-based organizations in Santa Rosa and elsewhere. Certainly working with folks like Director Kelly, who's already plugged into some of those communities. So really looking at a more focused outreach effort. Our outreach to date, I would say, has been more general in nature. And so we recognize that we need to do more focused outreach in this regard. And we welcome any help that you have.
I'm sorry, and if there's anything that I could do to help those efforts, please do.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Eddie. I appreciate that. And you are right. We have a lot of development happening in various parts of the county. So I guess the follow-up question that I have, Tanya, is there a way that you can work with city staff in permitting on some of those developments to incorporate electrical vehicle infrastructure, whether it's e-bikes or for cars and trucks, in the pre-planning stages of those developments?
Yeah, so that would certainly be what our intention is around the policy action items in terms of implementing that in policy. And then I know that jurisdictions are already, as they're working with new developers, recommending or suggesting some of those, whether it's EV chargers or solar panels, et cetera. Like the city of Cotati, I know staff has been doing that. So working on both a voluntary basis and encouraging developers, as well as looking at ways to make our codes more stringent and to get more EV charging out of those new developments.
And this is something that all of the directors can carry back to their community development departments, have them outreach with Tanya to get information on perhaps financing programs and how to work with developers, maybe looping in the North Coast Builders Exchange to talk about this. I think there are many ways that we could approach this, but talking about it at the pre-application stage is probably the best way of moving forward. Ariel Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to just echo that I think the planning and building directors of each of our cities and at Permit Sonoma certainly could use the staff support. One of the things we've been trying to implement locally in Healdsburg, we commissioned a study and got recommendations about bicycle infrastructure upgrades to our both commercial and residential building codes. But the planning department, since they're short-staffed and small-staffed, they have not yet implemented those suggestions internally. And we have a public works director who is telling his colleague, within the city, we need this update to happen. And they're like, we'll add it to the laundry list, So I think if RCPA could provide the technical support, either on a model code update that cities could choose to adopt, or technical support, I think we'd be able to advance some of those things much more swiftly, and also troubleshoot what some of those challenges might be for the developers, and get out in front of what some of those things might be to streamline the ability to adopt those upgrades. Thanks.
Thanks, Ariel. Sam Salmon, comments?
Yeah, I think Windsor is looking at a scooter program, and I'm hopeful with that. They're electric. They're not heavy. They can be stored in your living room. Thank you.
And please be careful when you're using those scooters. I've heard of more than a few people who have injuries falling off the scooters. Oh, there you go. Count me, I'm not going to try that.
Yeah, I think we've also had a number of deaths on bicycles, so.
That's true, absolutely.
And with that, I'll leave, thank you.
Thank you, Sam, I appreciate your comments. So Tanya, thank you so much for presenting this. Did you get the feedback that you needed? And then some?
I did. Yes, thank you. And I should also add happy birthday. I should have said this.
Thank you. All right, stop. Okay, thanks everybody. Let's move on to the next item on our agenda, which is another RCPA item, resolution number 2021-003 in support of the local action to ban new gas stations and transition to electric vehicles. So Tanya, take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to turn it over to BC Capps, who is our Climate Change Program Analyst, and he is going to give this presentation today. So BC, you're on mute, BC.
Thank you, Tanya. Drew, will you be able to share my slides, or should I share them from here?
I can share them if you want.
Wonderful, thank you.
Get that up.
So while that's coming up, I just wanted to say thank you for having me present today. Thank you, Madam Chair and Directors. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is BC Capps. As Tanya mentioned, I am a climate change program specialist here with RCPA and have been on staff since January, working on this project. Wanted to, as we get started here, I wanted to give especially a thank you to Tanya for carrying this item in July when I was out of town and the directors first heard on this item. So Drew, if you go to the next slide, I'll give just a brief overview of the topics I want to cover here today. Starting with the issue at hand, I wanted to give you some background information, wanted to talk about some recent actions that have been taken by our member jurisdictions, cover several areas of potential RCPA support, and then go over the key points in our resolution, which we're hoping that you could adopt today. Drew, next slide, please. So first off, what we have is there's two key issues that are for kind of asking your guidance on today. First is potential adoption of a proposed resolution that would support local actions to ban new gas stations throughout Sonoma County and all of its jurisdictions, and also getting input and feedback on potential support for RCPA may be able to take with its assisting the jurisdictions in adopting those bans. So next slide, please. So really briefly, I wanted to talk quickly about just a couple of two quick items that have happened in the news in the last several months since this report was kind of last before you. One, and I wanted to highlight the report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC report, basically came out in early August and talked about the science behind global heating and really used the term kind of a code red for humanity as a warning sign, as a warning call for immediate action. And also just around the same time, the Biden administration here in the US set a goal for 2030 that 50% of all new passenger vehicles and light trucks would be zero emissions vehicles by 2030. Go ahead, Drew, next slide, please. That at the international and national level has been backed here by a number of state executive orders at the state level, both from Governor Newsom and previously to that, Governor Brown. You can see some of the state executive orders that have been put in place there. And also locally, there have been a number of efforts starting here, starting with the Petaluma gas station ban that was adopted in March, and several other jurisdictions that are also very interested in this topic of banning new gas stations. And Drew, if you go to the next slide. So here I want to give just a little bit of current conditions, a bit of background information. I want to keep this brief so that we can keep moving forward today. Overall, our research shows that there's approximately 138 gas stations currently in Sonoma County. Those have a number of jurisdictions have continued to receive new applications coming in. There are a handful of that we know, 4 or 5 throughout the county and its jurisdictions. But these gas stations, as they're currently designed and implemented, have numerous impacts on public health and the environment, in addition to the GHG, the greenhouse gas emissions with internal combustion engines that we're really attempting to combat. So next slide, please, Drew. So again, a couple of the recent options that have happened here. City, as I mentioned, City of Petaluma has passed their passed an ordinance in March. The Santa Rosa Climate Action Subcommittee has been directed staff to work on this issue as well. The Sebastopol City Council has directed staff to draft the ordinance for their Planning Commission. And then I also wanted to highlight that the City of Cotati is developing an ordinance for the City Council as a part of their larger greenhouse gas strategy. And it was in May of this year that it was actually that Director Landman requested that the RCPA hear this item. And so therefore, kind of after the request in May, the presentation in August, and now this presentation, we are here today. Next slide, Drew, please. So briefly, I wanted to talk about a couple of areas that RCPA could provide, has been providing, and could continue to provide support for our jurisdictions. One is just the first is working with our local jurisdictions to identify the common barriers that they are facing to reduce emissions. The second is providing specific analysis on the gas station locations and proximity to the population centers and travel corridors. This is something that I know the City of Petaluma did in quite a bit of detail as part of their analysis. And then we could create guidance documents for the planning staff to develop jurisdiction-specific gas station ban ordinances. And in this case, we're looking that the RCPA resolution we're bringing today is a guidance ordinance resolution, of which then would be requesting each of the cities and the county to take additional action that would be within their local jurisdictions. So Drew, if you could go to the next slide. So the recommendation that I have here today is we are recommending that the recommendations that are in the resolution is that the County of Sonoma and the incorporated jurisdictions cease acceptance of all applications for new gas stations or the expansion of existing gas station infrastructure. We're also committing to working with the local government members to assist with this policy development and the implementation of these actions. And then the resolution also encourages the development of clean emission public transportation networks, pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure, and expanding efforts to serve zero emission vehicles. this is tied directly in with all of the electrical vehicle work that Tanya just presented on. So we also wanted to make sure this resolution not just talked about banning gas stations for the future, but what were the issues that also the additional infrastructure that needs to be put in for the electric vehicles. Drew, next slide, please. So there is one proposed change to the language that is in the ordinance that was published in the board packet. And my understanding is that what we want to do is we realized that we realized that there was a way to simplify the language in one more step to really clarify that our intention here is that this resolution applies to new applications coming fresh in the door, not to those existing applications that are currently under review by any of the local jurisdictions. We wanted to make sure that it's very crystal clear that we're talking about as new gas stations that are proposed after this date, or after a date that a jurisdiction has made this change, not that this ban should impact the current applications that are in the permitting pipeline. So we want to be clear about that. And so this is some language here that if it is accepted to the board, I believe it could be passed, included as part of the motion. Drew, next slide, please. And I think then kind of in wrapping up, this really brings me to the final request, really requesting approval of the resolution as presented to you today with the proposed wording change, and also seeking direction from the board to work with the planning staff at all of the local jurisdictions to discuss a coordinated approach and opportunities for resource sharing. As I mentioned, I have been working with City of Santa Rosa, Cotati, Petaluma, and Sebastopol so far in working with their staff on this issue. And I think it's time we really wanted to take the next step and really kind of call together all the jurisdictions together. So Drew, last and final slide, please. So I just wanted to say thank you for your time this afternoon. I look forward to answering any questions or hearing any comments. And at that point, I can conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, BC. It's great to see you in this role, and thank you for your work on this item. So let's open it up to the board for questions, and Linda Fisher is first. Thanks to Linda and Petaluma Council for starting this effort, absolutely. And then we'll hear from other board members.
Great, thank you. I have a question for BC, and that is the role of hydrogen in your analysis. Could you include that as well?
Let's see, that is something I think I should go back and speak with, we need to talk internally about. I think I would need to think through all of our work so far on this issue has been specifically about banning fossil fuel infrastructure. So before I answer something on the spot, I need to take that into consideration and look at how we can include hydrogen as part of this picture. It certainly could be part of our larger planning mechanisms, our larger planning efforts. I need to think through how it fits very specifically into this the wording of this resolution.
Yeah, okay, because what we did as a city was we banned all new gas stations, but said that existing gas stations can put in hydrogen facilities as long as it's water hydrogen. And we actually allowed that with a conditional use permit, not knowing quite how that's going to go. And then encouraged electric charging as well. And I agree with the speaker, Jenny, that people are probably not going to be charging their cars at gas stations. They're probably going to be doing it other places. But we didn't want to place any barriers to having gas stations convert there. But I agree with her. I think, you know, gas stations are eventually not going to be where anybody is.
Thanks, Linda. BC, do you have any comments about that? Any answer? No.
Not on the spot. I think I would like to check with our legal counsel, and at least I need to review the language and look at how that may play in.
I think if I could, Madam Chair, you know, the direction was to pursue a resolution related specifically to banning future gas stations. What a jurisdiction chooses to do in terms of allowances, I think is sort of a, maybe more of a case by case, but to Director Fisher's point, if that is something the other jurisdictions want to work on and a template that is helpful for each jurisdiction, as Santa Rosa's been working on a template in Cotati, and we're working with their staff, we can try and see how that melds together. But I think the idea behind this resolution was more specific to stopping an item as opposed to stopping the development of a future item, as opposed to what would be encouraged sort of to replace it.
Thanks. Any other board comments, questions? And Linda Hopkins, and then we'll have public comment and bring it back to the board for action.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to mention that our local coastal planning process is currently underway in unincorporated Sonoma County. And that unfortunately, when we take an action as a county, it doesn't automatically apply in the coastal zone. So in other words, if we want to get this ban into the sort of coastal zone, we need to act now so that it can then go forward with the formal process of approval through the Coastal Commission. So this is just a request for staff to potentially liaise with Permit Sonoma staff to talk about how we could support getting this into the LCP. And we've also been working on, and have always been supportive in Sonoma County, of banning any infrastructure on the coast that would support offshore oil drilling. And so just wanted to kind of also flag that as an issue, because it's I think all in the same spirit. So any help on the local coastal plan would be really, really appreciated by staff. I think you're on mute, Madam Chair.
I know, I'm apparently having some feedback from my microphone. So the host, Drew, keeps muting me. And I see Mark Landman, you have a comment.
Right, I was going to say this because it's not a question, but you asked for comments. So I'll trot it out now, so maybe we can wrap that up earlier. First of all, we always say this thanks to staff, but I do want to thank them very much. I remember when I brought this up in May, I said them truly believing that this should be an easy one. It shouldn't take much staff involvement. On that, clearly I was incorrect, but I want to thank them for their work on this and the really, I think, wonderful presentation today and work in this report, in this packet item. I think one key thing that jumps out at me, one staff recommendation I really like, the first one is, should we start with consideration, working together, having ROWA work as a hub to bring all the cities together to discuss this so we can work better, more intelligently, hopefully in a way that protects us in various fashions. And I think if we do that as a first step, and that's something I'd strongly suggest, bringing our planning directors together with RCPA staff to start working on this. Number one, as was mentioned by staff, any allowances that may come up from cities can be discussed certainly at that point, maybe rolled in. But also with that, I think the key thing we can get done is see if we just have county-wide agreement on the basic policy issue of how this works. So far, I think we do. But I think once we nail that down, then we can start looking for timelines of when we're willing to and able to work together in a discussion on legal issues, any CEQA that needs to be addressed or looked at, and how we determine that, and the other myriad issues that will arise. So that would be my recommendation, is that yes, number one, a big yes to approving this resolution today, and a big yes to starting staff at the RCPA working to bring cities that are interested, and I hope that's all of us, I'm crossing my fingers for that, to work on this. And I'll just close with the thought that I noticed we're starting out with the two biggest cities in Sonoma County, as well as a bunch of the smaller cities in Sonoma County. So I think that's a good thing. That tells me this is an interest and an item that works across widely different communities. And that means this is probably a really good thing in a good direction. So I'm very pleased with this, and I look forward to see where we're going. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director Landman. And Sarah Gurney, last comments before we go to public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do want to sneak in a comment here because I'd like the public to think about this and perhaps answer it. BC, I want to support your reaching out to the planning directors, just as Director Landman said. Also, I think it would be really good to reach out to the climate action committees and encourage them to talk about these issues in their broader network. With those two efforts, we educate and hopefully unite our staff, which then may unite our electeds. And if our public is also in support, then we can make it happen because we've created all the will from all those three dimensions. So I would make that suggestion to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Drew, could you see if we have any public comments?
Yeah, certainly. So I see 4 members of the public who wish to speak right now. And we will start with Alexa Forrester. Alexa, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great, thanks. I'm Alexa Forrester. I am calling in from Santa Rosa. Councilmember Alvarez and Director Alvarez, thank you for being here representing Santa Rosa. I think I saw Mayor Rogers earlier. I am just very heartened that this has come to the board, and I hope you will all resoundingly support it. I did want to flag one item, which is that on the Santa Rosa Climate Action Subcommittee last week, there were a number of us who attended that and were quite crestfallen that this had been taken off of Santa Rosa's immediate agenda. And we were told it couldn't be done by the end of the year because there just wasn't staff time. And so I just want to reiterate that I don't think it's a lack of will. I think it really is a lack of time. And the more support RCPA can do and the more the different jurisdictions can help each other, the better. Because especially if we're only talking about new gas stations, new applications. If we wait another year, we might have 5 new gas station applications in the pipeline. So if it's really only going to apply to new gas stations, we need to get it done as quickly as possible in as many jurisdictions as possible. So whatever we can do to facilitate that, I support. Thank you all.
All right, thank you, Alexa. And then just also, I received about 10 pre-submitted public comments. I have provided them all to the SCTA and RCPA Board of Directors, as well as posted them online on the SCTA and RCPA website. And with that, I have Rick Lutman up next. Rick, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
I think you directed it to Michael Lapelt. I got the notice.
Here, we'll start with Michael. Rick, you'll be up next. My apologies on that.
I'm sorry.
These lists move quickly.
Yeah, if he wants to go, he can. But I just want to reiterate that I hope that you folks support the ban on gas stations today. And also, in concurrence with Alexis, I attended the Santa Rosa Climate Subcommittee last week as well and was disheartened by the fact that they placed the ban on gas stations on a lower priority and pushed it till next year. And, you know, climate action is tough. It costs money, it takes time, but we're in an existential crisis and, you know, everybody's short on staff. They do the heavy lifting. Let's make a priority to hire new staff specific to climate action. And the great resource is in the community. I belong to a couple of climate action groups. They're very knowledgeable people. This is a good resource for support, for templates, hiring people part-time, just focusing on climate action is going to move our agenda forward to scale that we really need for our children. We can't continue to have our heads in the sand. And I know I'm speaking to the choir. You have a lot on your plate. And, you know, we always turn to staff. They need help. We need more of it. It just takes political will to hire them, support them however we can to move these policies forward in a very collaborative, holistic, and inclusive way. And I think I'll leave it there.
All right, thank you, Michael. Okay, Rick Lutman, my apologies for that previous. I have you up next, Rick, and I've permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Great, thank you, Drew.
There you go.
Right now,
I can hear you.
Right now, this afternoon, as we speak, there are people out in Sonoma County at car dealerships buying new ICE vehicles. So if it's a good idea to ban new gas stations, and I think it is, maybe we ought to think about also banning new car dealerships that sell ICE vehicles. Just a suggestion.
Thank you, Rick. The next I have in line is Woody Hastings. Woody, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you, Drew. Good afternoon, everyone. Woody Hastings again, this time with my Coalition Opposing New Gas Stations hat on. From the name, you can guess we wear our position on our sleeve, I guess, here to support the resolution, urging your aye vote. I don't want to be left out, though, before I say my comments, left out of wishing Chair Gorin a happy birthday. So happy birthday, Chair Gorin. So I first want to say that I totally agree with the amendments that were made to the resolution itself. We do believe that it's only fair that the folks that have gone by the existing rules and have submitted applications under the existing rules, they're in the pipeline. That this resolution should not impact them. So we agree with that. I also want to affirm what Suzanne Smith said about this action here being about keeping it as simple as possible, and this is about stopping the construction of new gas stations. It's about ending something. It's not a proactive act. And I think all those other things that you might want to do, either with gas stations or in other regards, respects to transportation, are kind of in a different bucket. And I think that it's a good idea to avoid unnecessary, avoidable kicking of a hornet's nest if you're doing things that would apply to existing gas stations and to sort of or unnecessarily complexify the resolution. So I think the way it is currently is good. So I do urge your yes vote, and I really appreciate the staff and the board for taking this issue up and getting it here to this day so quickly. It really was a relatively rapid process for government work. So thank you.
Thank you, Woody. Next I have in line is Lisa Pierce. Lisa, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you. My name's Lisa Pierce. I'm a committee member with Sebastopol Climate Action. And one of the big benefits I see is to passing this ban on new gas stations is that I think it would make people more reluctant to buy a new ICE vehicle and encourage people to buy an EV if they see the writing on the wall. I am concerned about the equity issues going forward and the hurdles that renters face with charging their EVs. But despite these concerns, I think we should go ahead and support this ban and work with the equity issues as best we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Next I have in line is Tom Conlon. Tom, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you, Drew. I appreciate the opportunity today. I too speak in support of this recommendation of staff and this resolution. I appreciate the wording change. I think the simplification is useful and will make it easier for the jurisdictions to put this into effect. I think that, harking back to the previous discussion at the last meeting where I believe it was Director Landman said that there was a kind of an epiphany that he had in working on this, that this was really actually going to relieve staff of a tremendous amount of work at the local staff level. I think this is a really important driver for this policy. And as we confront the climate crisis, we're going to need to be more efficient in governance. We're going to need to be able to set our priorities to more rapidly respond and implement the policies that will help us get in front of the crisis. Our economy is going to be increasingly under stress, and we're going to need to do that. So yes, it's unfortunate that we have to take something away here from property owners who might otherwise have at this present time unrestricted rights, but it's for the better of all of us to have those governance issues corrected. And so the other matter I would just quickly add is that in the potential areas to support, this is not a change to the resolution, but other areas you can be supporting local jurisdictions, you might want to consider tracking existing gasoline sales in the jurisdictions. It's already data that's already collected at the California Energy Commission, very easy to get, and it would be helpful. And so finally, I hope you will give Chair Gorin this birthday gift today by passing the measure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom. Next I have in line is Jenny Blaker. Jenny, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Jenny Blaker. I'm co-coordinator of the Coalition Opposing New Gas Stations. And of course, I'm absolutely delighted that this has come to the RCPA agenda today. And I thank you all very much. Especially want to thank the staff for their thorough and excellent analysis of the situation and the resolution that they've put forward. And I urge you to support it. I think it's very important to keep it as simple and streamlined as possible, just about banning new gas stations or not receiving applications for new gas stations. That's it. It would be much more time consuming and complicated to think about other forms of fuel, other uses of gas stations, anything else. This is just to say, no more new gas stations. That's it. And I think that will be the easiest and fastest way to work with this. And I thoroughly support your suggestion, and especially what Councilmember Mark Landman said about encouraging all the cities and the RCPA and the county to come together to work on this collaboratively. I think that would be an excellent way forward. Thank you all very much for your time and work on this issue. It seems like one very clear, easy step, or relatively easy step, in the changes that need to happen as fast as possible to in terms of the climate crisis and a timely response to what's going on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jenny. And then last in line I see is a Tyra Benoit. Ty, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. And I am from Healdsburg. I am involved with a number of climate action groups. So I really appreciate Director Gurney's suggestion that the RCPA reach out to those groups. And I'm just really encouraged by the actions that you're taking today and how much coordination is being shown in this regard. And perhaps based on what Director Kelly was saying earlier about the problems in Healdsburg and the Director of Public Works directing planning staff to work on more code language about electric vehicle charging stations, if we do all of these things together, it will decrease their need to review permits for new gas stations. So it does eliminate a workload. So thank you. And I hope that you will consider this and use this approach of really coordinating and helping jurisdictions to work together as you go forward on these other issues that you're trying to tackle.
Thank you, Tyra. Chair Gorin, I do not see any other members of the public who wish to speak on this item.
Thank you so much. Let's bring it back to the board for action. We have, I believe, a resolution in front of us. And do we have a motion to accept the resolution, or do we have any comments?
I see comments. I see 4 directors with their hands up.
All right, let's go through. Oh, yes, I see that. Just a note, Ariel Kelly needs to leave soon, and I have just corresponded with Suzanne saying, okay, we have 4 more plus items on our agenda this afternoon. So please keep your comments very short and let's move forward. Director Kelly.
I wholeheartedly support this motion and just wanted to make comment that I did reach out to some family-owned gas station operators within my jurisdiction just to give them a heads up that this conversation was happening, and they actually support it because they are being impacted greatly by these large corporate-owned gas station conglomerates that are kind of pushing them out due to economies of scale and their lack of ability to compete. And so they actually were not as opposed as I imagined they would be to Healdsburg passing such an ordinance. So I thought that was an interesting nuance and was delightfully surprised. And at the moment, I would like to support the resolution when we get to that point. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Director Kelly. Director Fisher.
Well, I'm going to offer that we are at that point, and I am going to suggest that we move approval of resolution number 2021-003.
Don't properly second that.
Okay, and also offer to the individual cities, you know, the reason that we are where we are in Petaluma is because we asked for a moratorium on gas stations initially. So that was a way to immediately stop it while we had a chance to then update our ordinances. So if that's a possibility in your city, I would suggest that that's a quick way to get it done. Thank you. Oh, and that motion included the changes that were recommended by staff.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. Who seconded that motion?
I did.
Director Giudice.
Okay, thank you. If you could, when you make a motion or a second, please read off your name because I don't see everybody on the screen. Director Landman, comments, questions?
Well, I was going to move this, but time has moved quickly, and I'm glad to see the enthusiasm from my colleagues. I'll make a quick comment. There were some great response from the public, and I share their, if not dismay, concern. When there's something we like, we want to see it happen quickly. But I would give a slightly different counsel on this. I think taking the time to do this right, this rolls into the first quarter of next year, we're going to turn around. It's going to be January. I mean, we're almost at the end of September. We're halfway through September. It really makes sense for everybody to work together because the elephant in the room we haven't talked about. I will give the example of what happened with the electric reach code and how that impacted some communities and how it didn't impact some others. And learning from that experience, I think if we do the work to do this together and do it right and essentially protect ourselves as best as possible, it'll be well worth an extra few months. And I think particularly having the help that Santa Rosa can bring, and I believe has offered to bring, according to its representatives, would be invaluable for that. So I suggest that. I think that'll be just fine, and it'll give us the time to get everybody to come to the table. So with that, thank you for the comments. I look forward to voting on this.
Great, thank you. Any further comments? If not, we will go to a roll call vote, please.
Certainly. So on the motion moved by Director Fisher, Director Bagby.
Aye.
Director Fisher?
Yes.
Director Giudice?
Yes.
Director Gurney?
Aye.
Director Hopkins?
Yes.
Director Kelly?
Yes.
Director Landman?
Aye.
Director Rabbit?
Aye.
Director Salmon?
He had to leave.
He had to go. We're going to go Director Alvarez in place of Vice Chair Rogers, and then Chair Gorin.
Aye. Thank you, BC, and Tanya and Suzanne and all the other staff for great work on this moving forward. It actually, as government works, this happened pretty quickly. So thank you to all of the directors for supporting this action. Hey, happy birthday to me. That was my birthday present. So thank you so much. Okay, let's move forward to item number 4.3, transit. And Suzanne, give us a hint on, since we probably have about half an hour left or maybe 20 minutes, your thoughts on what we could postpone, what we really need to take up today.
We need to do this item and the CTP item, and then the last item is a report out. So I'm hoping we can get through all three, hopefully.
All three or all four?
Because what's the fourth? Sorry, hold on, let me.
Yeah, there are 4 items there.
So 4.6 is it's a report out, and
and Vice Chair Rogers is not with us, and so maybe we can just do a quick report out.
Right.
Okay.
And 4.5 will be quick. It's just letting you know about the call for projects.
Okay, good. Okay, let's move forward with 4.3, Transit, the American Recovery Plan. So bring us that money.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair and directors. Back in March, you'll recall the federal government approved the American Rescue Plan, and there was a significant amount of money, about $30 billion, directed towards public transit for pandemic relief. In May, following that, MTC adopted 3 guiding principles for the distribution of the ARP funding, focused on stabilizing and sustaining transit, restoring and reimagining service, and improving the customer experience. So beginning in May, SCTA staff coordinated with the 4 transit operators that received funding from the 2 Sonoma County urbanized areas. So that's Sonoma County Transit, Santa Rosa City Bus, Petaluma Transit, and SMART. And we worked with our North Bay MTC commissioners and MTC staff on what it looks like to restore transit service to pre-pandemic levels with the support of ARP funds. The 4 operators identified detailed fiscal needs to restore and sustain pre-pandemic service levels for both rail and bus, and identified needs included bridging a bridge funding for bus transit investments included in the voter approved Go Sonoma Act, equity support for Sonoma County's high level of transit dependent riders, and recognition of the need to support our disaster recovery and additional pandemic hardships experienced by the 4 operators. So the way this is working is MTC is asking that our SCTA help coordinate this and therefore bless the funding distribution. So we've worked with the 4 operators, and as you'll see in the table in the staff report, the way this is going to work is there will be 2 tranches of funds, phase 1 and phase 2. In the first tranche, the formula that was put together by MTC will get us about $9.3 million for the 4 operators. And then there was an agreement about how the funding would be split among the 4. In addition to that, working with our commissioners, Commissioner Rabbit and Commissioner Fleming, we are securing an additional $4.6 million in that first phase. And then phase 2 will come later in the year or early next year. And we anticipate about $6.2 million at that point. So all told, $20 million for our local transit operators when you include that addition of the $4.6 million in hardship funds. So the action before you today is approval of a resolution that would codify that distribution and sort of bless it from the SCTA board. And if you have any questions about how we work together with the operators, I'm happy to respond, but I believe the operators are in the audience as well, should you have questions of them.
I just really want to thank everybody for this great work. We were expecting a dire outcome, and I really especially want to thank Director Rabbit for his work on MTC, and of course, Director Fleming for her work as well. So let's turn to Director Rabbit. So are you doing a little happy dance here?
Well, I'm glad that we were able to respond to the concerns, and I want to thank our staff and Suzanne Smith and MTC's staff. They set aside 10% of the first tranche of dollars. 5% of that, a minimum of 5, is now going to go to the Blue Ribbon Transit Recovery Task Force programs as yet to be determined. But there was a certain percentage that was set aside for hardship. We were able to convince them that we had unique circumstances here in the North Bay, so I'm glad that we were able to do that. And I'm glad that we're able to benefit in that vein. And I do think the collaboration of the 3 partners has really played a role into actually getting MTC to look favorably upon our request as well. So I don't want to underplay that, because I think it's really what, you know, as we struggle in the Bay Area with 27 different transit operators trying to figure out through this pandemic, you know, a total of what, 3.9 billion allocated through my committee to date is a huge number, and you still have some hemorrhaging going on of certain transit agencies as well. So glad that we were able to recoup some dollars for the North Bay.
And serving as chair of the SMART board, you're probably especially pleased about the additional funding for SMART, which is appreciated by the rest of the SMART board directors, absolutely. And soon, new general manager of SMART, whenever that person assumes the role. So let's hear from other board members' questions. I think we should be pretty pleased about this, and thank you for convincing your colleagues that we indeed do have a hardship on our hands at the moment, and what really need to thank all of the operators for working so collaboratively together to make it easy for Director Rabbit to advocate on our behalf. Any comments or questions? If not, we'll go to public comment, and I don't see any hands raised. So Drew, public comment on this item?
I do not see any members of the public who wish to speak on this item.
Great. Let's bring it back to the board. And again, thank you so much. I think the other directors also would add their thanks. And so we're breathing a little more easily about the pace of recovery that we hope to see over the next year or two. So we need a, I believe, how about a motion, Director Rabbit motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second, Fisher.
Linda Fisher, and a roll call vote, please, Drew.
Excuse me. All right, Director Bagby.
Aye.
Director Fisher.
Yes.
Director Giudice.
Yes.
Director Gurney.
Aye.
Director Hopkins.
Yes.
Director Kelly.
Yes.
Director Landman.
Aye.
Director Rabbit.
Aye.
Director Alvarez.
I am as an alternate for Director Rogers. Thank you.
And then Chair Gorin.
Aye. Thank you once again to all of the great work on this item. Much better outcome than I anticipated, absolutely. So let's move forward on item number 4.4, planning, presentation on the final comprehensive transportation plan. And before we have the presentation, I just wanted to thank all of the staff for working on this. It's very readable, probably very complete. And we'll have some discussion about what should have been added, what might have been added. So let's move forward on that presentation.
Thank you, Chair Gordon, members of the board. Good afternoon. I'm here today to present the CTP for your approval. We brought you the draft in July, heard comments and questions from the board and the public, and are here today to present the comprehensive transportation plan moving forward 2050 for your approval. Next, please. Okay, so briefly, I will go through the stages of the creating it. The CTP has been a multi-year project done in-house. Public outreach, which began with sessions with the community-based organizations, started right away in 2019. There were creation of new vision and goals began in late 2019 with a series of board meetings and workshops about previous plan performance and the desire to set the bar high with bold goals. Stages 3 and 4 were about staff working with local planners, public works departments, and the public, updating all the analysis and writing the plan. Next, please. All right, so here's a reminder of our vision and goals. Our 4 goals are that our transportation system should be connected and reliable, safe and well-maintained, community-oriented and place-based, and zero emissions. Next, please. All right, on July 12th, we presented the draft CTP. On this slide is a summary of the comments that we heard at that meeting and from the public. In the following slides, I'll spend some time on the comments and how we address them in the CTP. Next, please. All right, let's start with the biggest, hardest issue. How do we achieve goal 4, zero emissions in the transportation sector? In the performance assessment, the model does not show a drastic reduction of GHG emissions by 2050. Why is that? Well, the performance of the plan is largely based on the projects in the plan submitted by the jurisdictions and by SCTA RCPA. Increasing transit and building out the bike and pedestrian infrastructure projects are key to reducing BMT. But what we have found is that performance of the plan on the GHG reducing goal is not related exclusively to transportation projects listed in the CTP. Things like land use, job growth, population growth, and the densification of urban areas have significant impact. Persuading people to change their travel habits is tricky and requires a variety of strategies. Next, please. The SCTA and RCPA together have developed the SHIFT plan and the Sonoma County Climate Mobilization Strategy, as discussed earlier in this meeting. These plans and their solutions are included in the SCTA and the CTP, I'm sorry. Next, please. All right, these are all projects spearheaded by SCTA with the goal to change the way people travel. Just gonna pause, there's a lot on that slide. You can find out more about these and other projects in the bicycle section or the mode shift section of the CTP. Next, please. And you've already heard about this as well, which is a good thing. SCTA has worked to make the electrification transportation more accessible to the public. These are some examples. Next, please. SCTA works to provide transit agencies funds for marketing and is engaged in the multi-year study on transit integration and efficiency and the great work being done by the Future Transit Ad Hoc Committee. Next, please. All right, so on to our projects. The majority of project funding in the plan is dedicated to bikes and transit. There are 111 bicycle and pedestrian projects, including the largest ones that are listed on this slide. There are transit projects that improve and increase service countywide, including SMART to Cloverdale. In the Mode Shift Program section of Chapter 3, there is a list of projects and programs that still await funding. Next, please. There were comments about other aspects of the CTP as well. We heard about addressing the cost of travel as part of household budgets and how travel can and should be more affordable. Driving is expensive, so driving less and using transit, biking, or walking will save money and may be a good option for short trips. On this slide, you'll see a variety of strategies to provide more cost-effective options. Creating an adequate infrastructure for alternative modes and incentives to help make the change easier will be discussed later in the presentation. Next, please. There are comments with suggestions and concerns about air travel, Highway 101 congestion, and public engagement. Regarding air travel, SCTA is engaged in surface transportation modes, but has no authority over aviation. To the complaint of congestion on Highway 101, especially on on-ramps, we respond that HOV lanes are for carpooling and transit should offer some relief. Unfortunately, as the population increases, there is likely to be more traffic. As to concerns about public engagement, I must highlight the robust rounds of meetings in person and via Zoom, the series of webinars and numerous email blasts and Facebook posts. All the details are in the appendices 1.1 and 1.2. Next, please. So there are a variety of projects in the project list. The CTP has an unconstrained list with over $10 billion of projects and programs. MTC has recently shared with us that the 30-year revenue forecast to Sonoma County is $6.7 billion, leaving a deficit that includes $1.5 billion in transit expansion and nearly that much in road maintenance. We are fortunate to have the new transportation sales tax measure, but we will also continue looking for additional sources of funding. Next, please. In the early summer, we discussed the CTP and advisory committees and took input. On July 12th, we presented the draft here and took comments for the public until mid-August. Today, we present the CTP for your approval. Next, please. Tried to make that fast, so thank you for your attention, and I'm available for questions.
Well, for what is it, 185 pages, your presentation was really short. So thank you so much, Janet, for all of your work on the CTP. And now let's open it up to the board for questions or comments. And Delinda Fisher and Melanie Bagby.
Thank you. I have a question, and I think maybe I didn't understand this in July when it was brought before us, because it's my first time seeing such a thing, but reading it again yesterday, it struck me as how amazingly comprehensive this plan is, and just a vast amount of knowledge and information that I found really helpful. At our hearing in July, I commented about that disconnect between our goals at the RCPA and what this plan actually accomplishes. And I guess I have a question about, now I understand that it's the projects that we all have submitted as jurisdictions that have informed the plan and the results. And so I guess I have a question about the slide you just put up about funding, that we've submitted projects that equal a certain amount of funding, and there's another amount of funding that we're actually going to get. And so our question is, what is the plan based on in terms of the projects? All the projects that were submitted, or a certain percentage of the projects? There lies my question.
It is an unconstrained, financially unconstrained project list.
Okay, so what I'm understanding then is, if we, and this is not a question, it's a comment, that if we really want this plan to meet our RCPA net neutrality goals by 2030, and certainly in our city, you know, we understand it's a really audacious goal, that the only way we're going to get there is if we change the projects that we submit in terms of the request for funding. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Delinda. And Melanie Bagby?
Great, thank you, Janet, and thank you, Madam Chair. I need a little clarification. So it's interesting listening to the feedback. I'm going to start with that, because it was very, very similar to the feedback that I heard on the Plan Bay Area's feedback on their listening sessions. So it was very interesting to me to hear that folks in Sonoma County were giving very similar feedback to this plan as the Plan Bay Area 2020 feedback. I think I might have been the only board member on that August report out. And interestingly, when they finally got to, it was really valuable, and I also appreciate it in this plan as well, is that you describe the methodology very thoroughly. MTCA explained their methodology. I think it was like the first 20 or 30 minutes of the presentation, actually, until they got to their first slide of feedback. And you know, I think we should be commended. One of the things that they said that they heard very loud and clear was support for the continuation of SMART all the way to Cloverdale, which you have mentioned in here as well. So I guess, you know, kudos to us for making our voices heard and letting them know that that's a priority, which of course the board has advised the staff that that's a priority for the board as well. So I guess I need some clarification on back on your slide. Include operations or construction costs? Is that you referred to in here? Which was that?
So you cut out on part of the question there, but I heard you ask about construction costs.
Yes, if you could clarify, are you, in your report, are you talking about operations or construction costs?
For
the completion to Cloverdale?
It's both.
Both.
Okay, both. Okay, okay. And then I guess I would just follow that up by, you know, I'm glad to see that. I'm glad to see that that was part of the feedback. And then, you know, what this board and this agency is going to need to do, you know, when we're talking about our plan and Plan Bay Area, is now that they've done their report out as well, is what are the next steps to make sure that, you know, projects like those that are important for us are followed up on. My next comment would be that I think that this is something that's going to impact Plan Bay Area as well as our plan, is that now that we have a number of folks who will probably be living here and working here, if our priority for transit is getting people out of their cars, and if our priority is building housing where people live, what does that mean when a huge, you know, a significant percent, and I don't know what that number is, I don't think anybody knows what that number is, but moving forward, if we're seeing a big shift in commute habits, what does it mean when people are working from home? And then what does transit, or getting people out of their cars, or getting people onto electric bikes, what does that look like for both our transportation policy and our housing policy going forward? And are we making sure that, you know, we are responding to we know how significant this shift is, and we are responding accordingly and appropriately in our various jurisdictions?
We have a significant request for investment in transit. Half of the project list is in transit. So that's just to recognize the needs we already have and have already measured. In terms of the changes in land use, we haven't really been able to measure that quite yet, as you know, as you're referring to about the telecommute. We'll be looking at that more closely in the years to come. But we have a lot of transit projects in the list right now. And so what it means for the next steps is that we will be looking for funding to close the deficit for all of our projects.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that answer. And I honestly, Janet, I think that, you know, small jurisdictions like mine or big jurisdictions are probably going to need is we're going to need help from RCPA to appreciate what that shift looks like, and so that we can adjust our projects that we're submitting accordingly to I think what I think is going to be a very, very quick societal change. So I thank you. I appreciate your response.
And I don't see any more hands raised, but Gerard Giudice also said that he has a 5 p.m. Council meeting. So we're going to lose 2 of our directors, but I don't see any more hands raised. So let's go to public comment. Drew, any public comment?
Yes, I see 2 members wishing to speak right now. Let's get that. Why hasn't that? There we go. All righty, where's my participants? Yes. All right, Eris Weaver, I have you up first. I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thanks. Eris Weaver with the Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition. And of course, I have a couple comments about the bike-related parts of the plan. On page 68 of your packet, there is in the appendix, the GHG Reducing Strategies Matrix. And there's just a couple items on there I wanted to comment on about improving bicycle parking. One item mentions requiring parking at work, which is definitely needed if we want more people to commute. But then there's also improved parking at transit hubs and at park and ride lots. What I experience as a daily cyclist and what I hear from my constituents is a lack of bike parking at the places where people go shopping. If you want to, if we want people for those 2 to 3 mile trips to use bikes and not cars, there has to be a secure place to park their bike. I don't park my bike anymore at a transit place because I've had too many bikes stolen, parked at bus stops or at the train. And I never see bikes parked at the train stations. So I would like to see something added about increasing parking at other destinations where people conduct their errands. My other comment kind of has to do with the breakdown of projects. If all the projects in the plan were built, the bike project and the bike and ped project added to what there is now, we would still only 28% of the miles of those bike facilities would be class 1 or class 4, which research shows reduces collisions, fatalities, and injuries, not just among cyclists, but among every user of the road. When we move the vulnerable users to another space, that makes a difference. And we're not going to get the mode shift if we don't make roads safe, because that's what I hear over and over again is the biggest barrier to people bicycling is the roads not being safe. The city of Portland, so we tend to make the type 2 bike lanes our default, right? And they don't make any difference in getting people to move. The city of Portland, quite some years ago, decided that their default was going to be the class 4 buffered bike lanes. Now, that doesn't mean that every single mile in Portland is going to be that kind of bike lane, but it means that's the default. So if you're going to do something else, you got to have a damn good justification for why you would do something else. And I would encourage all of our jurisdictions to adopt that default standard. Thank you.
Thank you, Eris. Next I have is Steve Bertelbaugh. Steve, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you, Steve Bertelbaugh again with the Transportation and Land Use Coalition. I want to commend the staff on the length of the matrix that shows the GHG reducing strategies. I counted 54 different strategies, of which about half could be done or started at least in the first year. That's a very useful matrix, and I think it'll be useful to every planning director and to every public works director, both here in this county and as we intend to be an example for others in other counties. And I have already started sending this list around to other counties. The issue that I am most concerned about, however, is that although 2 different plans, one with an objective of reducing greenhouse gases by 2030, were mentioned in the staff report or in the report today, one of those, the 2030 deadline, doesn't show up in the written material, and I think it should be there. So I would urge that a reference to the climate mobilization strategy be included with that 2030 zero carbon objective. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Next, I have Tom Conlon. Tom, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Thank you, Drew, and members of the board. I too want to commend staff for this effort today. I think that the board was quite strong, I think, in the initial feedback given to staff last time this came before you. And I think I would agree with what Mr. Bertelbaugh just said, that the matrix is a major improvement, in particular, the phasing of the matrix. My concern is that this has kind of been rushed before you from my perspective. It did not get a chance to be reviewed by the Citizens Advisory Commission or by the Technical Advisory Commission. And I do think that there is much new that's been added to the plan, and that it could improve from review by those 2 advisory bodies that really do pay attention to these matters. I also share Director Fisher's concern about the kind of the structural nature of this, which is that it is a financially unconstrained list of projects. And it's, you know, I come from a business background where if you have a plan, your plan has a sort of logic to its execution and what will happen what the contingencies that will happen if certain things in the future fail to materialize. And in this case, we have a plan where we are forecasting, well, if we get all the money that we need, we will be successful. But in business, that's very hard to predict that. So you make plans to work within various levels of funding that may be available to you, and you meet your goals within the resources that you have available. So I would suggest you push this back to the TAC and the CAC, and we have another go around on this. Thank you for your consideration on our comments.
Thank you, Tom. Next I have in line is, I have permitted you to speak. You may start when you unmute yourself.
Hi, Michael Lepelt, a longtime cyclist. Cycling is my primary mode of transportation, and I'm sure Eris and other cyclists can attest to the fact that most bike lanes are unsafe as they now exist. Once a week, I have 1 or 2 near misses. So safety of bike paths is really essential. And I just want to speak from a Santa Rosa perspective. The updated 2018 bike pedestrian plan, they have a lot of projects, proposed projects in the pipeline, but they're mostly piecemeal. And I think if we want to encourage to scale cyclists, we need safe pathways. And why not have, for example, in Santa Rosa, 2 lanes, north and south, 2 east and west, connecting strategically to downtown shopping, hospitals, et cetera, that are separated, not competing with traffic. And also, as you extend the SMART train to Cloverdale, let's not forget about the bike lane that was mandated that whole distance. That would be a great marketing tool for people in the Bay Area to say, come to Marin and Sonoma County, you don't need your vehicle. Bring your bike, bring your family, get on the train, get off where you want to, and have connections east and west with each municipality. And so in Santa Rosa, the Jennings Crossing is really vital, a vital piece to connect east and west. And so I really encourage you to look at projects that have continuity and not piecemeal, so that the general public can see more cyclists, get encouraged, get out, knowing that it'd be safe. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time, and thanks for all your good work.
Thank you, Michael. Chair Gorin, I do not see any other members of the public who wish to speak.
Thank you so much, Drew. Do we have any other board member comments? I don't see any comments or questions. But I'm wondering, Janet or Director Smith, General Manager Smith, there were some questions, clarifications, perhaps additions to the matrix. Do we have to formally adopt any amendments, or can we just take the direction that the community has offered in the spirit with which it was given?
I think I would say the latter, but I mean, what we're seeking today is approval of the plan. Are there tweaks that could improve it? I'm sure there are. There always are in every plan, but I don't think it's accurate to say this has been rushed. It has been before all of the committees multiple times. We did make edits based on the comments received from the board and the public, and really tried to beef up that connection, especially with related to GHG emissions and transportation. And I would add, we are hoping to get started as soon as we're wrapping this up on updating the bike and pedestrian plan. So I don't know if that answers your question, but we are we're seeking your approval today on the plan the way it is. If you have some technical corrections that based on the comment we heard, like bike parking at places where people run errands, I believe Steve Bertelbaum submitted some comments about adding a bullet or some on page 74. I mean, we can make those tweaks, or we can take them as sort of part of the approval that we understand and acknowledge, and we'll carry that forward. But I do think the plan is in really good shape, and we would welcome your approval of it.
Great, thank you so much for that clarification. I appreciate that, and that is the direction I think that is appropriate to take. Directors, may I have a motion that we approve the comprehensive transportation plan and receive the public comments and board director comments and incorporate them in the planning activities moving forward?
So moved, Rabbit.
Second, Gerard.
Thank you, Gerard. I know you need to leave, so we're going to now move to the roll call vote, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the motion from Director Rabbit, Director Bagby.
Aye.
Director Fisher.
Yes.
Director Giudice.
Yes.
Director Gurney.
Aye.
Director Hopkins.
Yes, and I actually am wondering if I can slip a question in. I tried to raise my hand, but I wasn't quick enough, which is just, you know, when it comes to implementation, right? And obviously we know we have limited funds and a lot of projects and ideas and goals on the list. I mean, is there a way in which we can take some of that community feedback in terms of really prioritizing the GHG reductions? Because that also seems to me to be a way of, you know, meeting the community's needs, right? They want to see that part of the plan prioritized.
Absolutely. In fact, the next item is kind of germane to that that implementation piece and talking about the call for projects and what criteria we should be using to assess those projects.
Great. Okay, thumbs up. Thank you.
Hey, you slipped it in, Linda.
Director Kelly, did we lose her? Yep. Director Landman.
Aye.
Director Rabbit.
Aye.
Director Alvarez, sitting in for Vice Chair Rogers.
Correct, sir. Aye, as an alternate for Director Rogers. Thank you, sir.
Yep. And then Chair Gorin.
Aye. Once again, thank you, Janet, and all of the staff for well done job. And obviously, when we have a document of this length in this kind of changing environment, we know that the words that you have carefully drafted and are printed in the document will be changing probably before we review it. But nevertheless, great job. And I look forward to the next discussion to talk about prioritization and call for projects. So let's move on. Suzanne.
Great, thank you. And if I could just take a second to thank Janet, Dana Ture, and Chris Barney, who really spearheaded the plan over the last couple of years, as well as, this was literally everybody in the office. So the RCPA team, the SCTA team. When you do a document like this in-house with virtually no consultant support, it's a heavy lift. And so I appreciate the support from the board and the kind words from the board members and the public as well. So the next item is our call for projects, and Shauna Gauze is going to present that, I believe. So Drew can elevate her up to panelist. But I think this speaks to what Director Hopkins was suggesting. This is our first sort of big programming opportunity for funds to implement projects that are part of the plan. So with that, I will hand it over to Shauna.
Thank you, Suzanne. Good afternoon, directors. Happy birthday, Chair Gorin. So as you just heard, SCTA has spent the last 2 years updating the CTP. And as part of that update, each of the jurisdictions provided us with their priority projects. And those priorities were based on general plans, individual capital improvement program, other planning documents, and public engagement. SCTA again went out to the jurisdictions and asked for priorities during the development of the Go Sonoma measure. And those lists of projects were provided to us to be used as examples of types of projects that would be placed into the measure. But we wanted those two lists to coalesce, and they did. In June of this year, staff presented a strategy to the SCTA board and to the TAC, the Technical Advisory Committee, to program a number of funding sources expected to become available in the next 5 years. A call for projects was released on August 9th for the 2021 SCTA Funding Program. Now, the initial result of this call will be to select projects for programming in the State Transportation Improvement Program, otherwise known as the STIP, and which are due to MTC in October. There are several other fund sources that will be aligned to deliver multiple types of priority projects across the county. Staff will evaluate the projects submitted against the program criteria, funding requirements, and the CTP goals that we've just been talking so much about. The goal is to program nearly $70 million over the next 5 years. SCTA staff is working closely with all the local agency staff on this call for projects. Applications for this call are due on this Thursday, September 16th, and staff will bring the proposed STIP projects before the board in October. A supplemental call will probably be likely to be issued after the One Bay Area grant policies and procedures are finalized by MTC in December. And the proposed list of projects that will make up the majority of the remainder of the funding available will come back to the board for final approval in the early part of 2022. This concludes my report, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Shauna. I really appreciate your report and the information that you drafted in here. I'm going to probably blanketly say the deadline is what, Thursday? And so all of us should be on the email asking our staffs what kind of projects have been submitted by the various jurisdictions. And I bet we're all going to be disappointed that the list is not like 12 feet long, but funding is limited nevertheless. Okay, comments from the boards, questions from the boards, and I don't see any. There's a hand, Sarah. Go.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just have a process question. Make sure I understand this. We submit now. This is for 5 years funding in our future. What if our projects change or we have to, in our individual cities, reassess our priorities? Is there some process, Shauna, that deals with changes like that?
Well, certainly. I mean, I would expect that there might be differences between the projects that were submitted maybe for the CTP or for the Go Sonoma plan and what is being asked for right now. This is a programming exercise, so they won't really change. We're going to program money to the projects that are selected. So those projects won't change in the next 5 years, but as more funding sources become available, we could certainly consider new ideas. But the idea is to identify the priorities per jurisdiction, and then SCTA can actively work towards funding those priorities that have been identified. So even if projects aren't selected during this round, when new project sources or funding sources become available, SCTA has a go-to list of projects that can get funded. And so we will be looking toward that list. We want those projects to be as high up in a jurisdiction's priority as possible.
Okay, I'll have to follow up offline separately because that didn't really hit my question. But thank you for those details.
I apologize.
I think that honestly, Director Gurney, the short answer is they shouldn't change much. I mean, it's a 5-year programming exercise because that's when the funds are available over a 5-year period, and it typically takes a year or two to get through the environmental and design process, as you know. And then you get to construction. Now, during the environmental and design processes, there may be tweaks to a project that when you make the selection for the proper, the preferred alternative, et cetera. But the idea of saying, City of Cloverdale wants this project, and then 3 years later saying, nope, Cloverdale doesn't want that, it wants another project, that's not part of this process.
Right, I think that's more helpful because I was looking more along the tweak line, not the substitute brand new something else. So I'm anticipating we have some meeting of the minds here and we can work out the situation as we go into those 5 years. Thank you, Suzanne, too.
I'm sorry for not being more clear.
It's good you're both helpful.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands raised. Do we have any other questions or comments? If not, we'll go to public comment. Drew?
I do not see any members of the public who wish to speak on this item at this moment.
Okay. This is a report, but take my suggestion. You might talk with your transportation directors in your cities and county to figure out what projects will be submitted on behalf of your jurisdictions for consideration for the next 5 years. So great. That concludes the official, the Future of Transit ad hoc report. Suzanne, Vice Chair Rogers is not here, but can you give us a very brief report up?
I can. So the ad hoc committee met briefly last week with all of the the 3 bus operators. There was an update from the 3 operators on ridership. Now that school has started back, they are seeing an uptick in ridership, which is good news. In addition, we talked about the status of phase 1 integration work. So this is the work that the operators are doing to have a more coordinated presence for riders. And then lastly, we talked about the fact that we have secured the $750,000 from MTC for the transit integration phase 2 work. And we are working through the bureaucratic minutia of contracting for that. But we hope to have that money flowing by the beginning of the year so that the phase 2 work can start in January. So that is the report, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. And I noted that Delinda Fisher needs to leave soon. And thank you, Delinda, for great comments and participation, and good luck in your board meeting tonight, your council meeting. So I was reviewing all of the meeting notes from the various reports that we have in our agenda. And Suzanne, is there anything in particular that you think it's important to highlight?
I am going to say that it's up to the chair. We've got some reports from RCPA about the water bill, water upgrade save. James always has some updates on the highway report, but it is all in writing in the packet if that is easier for the group.
It's probably easier for the group because it looks like our group is getting smaller and smaller by the minute.
We are barely at a quorum.
Thank you to the staff, members of the community, and certainly my directors for my birthday greetings. Yeah, my birthday is not all that great. I've been in meetings all day and I'm tonight preparing for the board meeting tomorrow. But see you all, board members, tomorrow. And thank you. Be well, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.